admirable job. I think I want to say this. It's very, very tough as a professional, especially, and then as a woman, to come up and share, vulnerability. And I was mentioning to you, I was flipping through your book yesterday and I intend reading it fully. But I think a lot of the sharing from your family, a lot of what you've shared is what I would call extremely intimate. And I really hope that it inspires, many, many more people. And that brings me to my first question to you. Why should people read the book? Because a lot of the time people will think that, look, I should read it if I have a mental condition, or I should read it only if somebody in my family has a mental condition, or if I'm interested in mental health. Why should everyone read this book?
Thanks, Deepali. Well, I'd like to think it's a inspiring story of, as I said, resilience and vulnerability. I think also that mental health itself is really poorly understood in this country, and the fact is that we are all affected by it at some level. We all have somebody in our inner circles who's dealing with a challenge, and I think it's not just about people who are, who are suffering with a challenge, but if all of us are involved as caregivers, or even if we're not caregivers, as allies. And I think for being better allies, if we just all shape the conversation in a better way, that's one way to reduce the stigma. It's a bit like climate change, right? I mean, I think 2 decades ago, climate change was a new word for us. But once we start having a conversation about climate change, that's when really the whole society can progress.
Thanks very much, and you're absolutely right. I think the more that we can do about raising awareness in the space of mental health, I think better off we are as, I think, a planet and as a generation. And coming to generation, there are 2 questions I want to ask you, one about the older generation and one about the younger one. I mentor a startup, which actually does a lot of work with Gen Zs in the marketing space. I mean, I'm a marketer. However, they did some interesting work recently talking to about 1,500, Gen Z audiences. And they decided to ask some questions on mental health, because this is becoming a topic of discussion on social media also. What is your take on that? Do you think the younger generation's attitude is different? Are they more open? Is it shifting? What do you think? Are the metro Gen Zs different from the non-metros? I know that you and I haven't done any study on this, but I just wanted to get your take on this.
Yeah, definitely. I think the younger generation is much more aware, much more self-aware. They've got much more access to social media. Sometimes it can go to another extreme where they are talking about, conditions like ADHD or bipolar or depression in a more casual way, and, just saying that, oh, you're so OCD, or, those kind of comments also happen. But I think overall, I think there's just a lot more willingness to not only talk about it, but to seek help, right? To go to therapy and to get professional help on a regular basis. I always maintain that, you don't have to be kind of broken or something like that to seek therapy or to seek help. It's just a great thing to be able to do for everyday life also.
On a similar note, so my friend is a CEO at Juno Clinic. They're an online, mental health. You can seek therapy, and it's all online. And they had huge growth during COVID, by the way. They grew 250% during COVID, whereas their normal rate of growth used to be before that some 30% per annum, kind of a thing. Interestingly, she shared some data with me. 95% of the people, and this is not on account of the fact that it's digital or internet, but 95% of the people who come to them are under the age of 40. And she was referring to the societal taboo, that people don't think it's right, to seek help. So my question to you is, what can be done more to remove that societal taboo?
Yeah, I think we just need more and more people to be willing to talk about it. Like the other day, I went to meet a startup founder, and he told me very openly, yeah, mental health is really important. I go to therapy, I've told people about it. But that's not a conversation I've had very often, I have to tell you, So I think we need people in leadership positions to acknowledge the value of professional services such as therapy, to talk about vulnerabilities, to talk about resilience, to talk about the important role of allies. We need leadership to acknowledge all of that.
And I must share an anecdote there, since you're talking about it. I think I got introduced to this space 15 years ago when my son went to school, thanks to a school who actually used to have, I think they call them occupational therapists, in the school. And my son was refusing to run in a race, with all the other children. And, she called us over and she said something very interesting to us, saying that, such young children, whatever they behave and do is a function of what's happening at home. But having said that, my parents and a lot of the other people's reaction at home was a bit of a question mark, saying, you got called by the therapist at school, is everything okay? And I realized that everything was okay, and she just did some play therapy and it turned out to be well. But I think it opened my mind to the fact that anyone actually should be and can go to therapists. And you're right, I think there's such stories need to be told. So while we're talking about therapy, you mentioned actually 7 therapies, in your book. So which one of these, if you can choose, according to you, is the most important, in learning how to live and thrive when you have a mental health condition?
I mean, I think it's a tough question because I think what's happening, a lot of calls and messages that I get from people are people who are just struggling to keep their head above water and to survive. So to survive, I think you really need this troika of, you need the caregivers or the love therapy, as I call it. They have to be aligned and accept it and support. You also need the talk therapy and the professional therapy from doctors. And then the lifestyle therapy, which I talked about earlier, which is just, sleep, exercise, nutrition. So I think without these 3 things, you don't even survive. But I think to take you from a place to say, I'm just surviving, to say, okay, I can write a book about it, or I can become an advocate and I can talk about mental health publicly, is really the conversation you're having with yourself. Because only you can really understand that. Only you are listening to yourself. And only you understand your triggers and what will actually, take you in a certain direction and how you want to deal with those. So that conversation is really important.
You were talking about the fact that a startup founder was, willing to talk about it. And I work for IBM, and they're a very progressive organization, I must say. In fact, we recently had a talk even about menopause, for example, and there's been conversation on mental health. There is a helpline that you provide, and that's my request to everyone. Please pick up her book. There is a very nice resources, towards the end of the book that have been mentioned. I think that's extremely useful.
I have to give a shout out to my colleague Krithi, who put that together for me. Thank you, Krithi.
Yeah, thank you for doing that. I think a lot of the times we don't even know, how to go. So coming back, progressive companies are doing these conversations, and they're also providing, anonymously, you can go and seek professional help and so on and so forth. What more can be done?
I mean, there's huge amounts, right? First of all, I think there is this attitude, I think, amongst business, and maybe I've also been guilty of this in the past, that we will stress you out with like really bad deadlines and a lot of pressure and workload and a toxic culture, and then we will expect you to go to yoga and just deal with all of it, So I think that fundamental relationship between the social contract between business and employees needs to be looked at, in a sense that, is it not possible to have a culture which is high performing but also empathetic? Is it not possible to get work done without being toxic? So I think that is something that we should look at, really, the conversation that I would love to have with leadership and CEOs. And I think that's the missing piece. That's very important. And towards that conversation, I think there's many policies that one could put in place in terms of the kind of, the kind of hours that people are expected to work. There are all sorts of, leaves, mental health leaves that people can be given. I mean, I think there's a plethora of different things that companies can actually begin to do. But I think addressing this as a kind of a strategic issue, to say that, what is the sort of culture that we're promoting? And I think it's important for businesses to look a bit inwards, because at one level, every company wants to project itself as a great place to work and hire talent and talk about the culture. But is that really the reality that's happening inside the company? And what are you doing about, for example, what are you doing about high-performing toxic bosses? What are you actually willing to do about them? So I think these are this is really the focus that I would love to see.
I totally agree with you, and I think it's going to be a very tough one. Imagine you have a sales head who is a toxic boss, but, performs and delivers the numbers, it's going to be very difficult to catch him or her on. In fact, there's an idea there. You're a woman with influence. People who are, very big influencers and are decision makers. A lot of the times when we are judging companies as, great place to work, or maybe even, what they report, I somehow feel that there should be a happiness index that they should be measuring of their employees. We do employee engagement surveys. We check whether people will recommend us or not, and how engaged they are, but we don't check on their happiness.
So one of the things I thought about is, now you have all these helplines for sexual harassment. Couldn't you have a helpline for a toxic boss? Yeah. What would that look like? If people could report anonymously on a toxic boss and without worrying about their career prospects and their reputation within a company, how would that actually work out? So I think that could be another expression of the same idea that you suggested.
Yeah. And lots of the times, I think different companies have different cultures. And culture is a conversation which we don't have often enough inside boardrooms. It's also very difficult to define. In the podcast that I manage with the CEOs, I sometimes ask them, and each one of them have a very ephemeral and a very different definition, and it's nice and interesting, but it's not a boardroom conversation. And I think if it were to, get there, that'd be of, real help. But any questions from the audience here? Yeah, we have two raised hands. If you could take the mic there.
Thank you, Aparna. I mean, it's really good. Just one comment about your last point. We have 360-degree feedback, but double quotes, you know how it works. Anyway, so now coming to my question about, there are 2 points. You mentioned that you should look into yourself, all the issues, and try to see how it can be solved. Now, my comment from my side is, which I have normally observed from overall is, that what happens is when you try to look back and you try to find out that how can I improve and all that, it might take you to another level of depression, that because you are still getting into yourself problem. Yeah, you're not trying to come out, you're still thinking why it happened with me. And then, a lot of people think, oh, mere saath hi kyun hota hai, like that. Yeah. Second point is about, you mentioned about talk to yourself. The problem with when you say talk to yourself, you are always within your boundaries. You're not able to think out of the box. Yeah. And there you need that, if you talk to somebody you can depend on, maybe your parents, your friends, your brothers, siblings, anybody, then definitely it makes more sense, because they can guide you, they can put their thoughts on, and they can try to take you outside. I mean, your thought, please. Yeah.
No, I think these are very relevant concerns. I'm glad you raised them. I think what has really worked for me is that I had a lot of conversations with people in my ecosystem about, why they felt I was sort of not, why I was struggling with my emotions and with my thoughts. And apart from the people who helped me, I also was going to therapy. So therapy did give me that structure. It's just that this combination of reflecting further on it and going deeper into it, because a therapist cannot be with you every day of the week, So at least something like a journal gives you that. So that therapist is one. The second is I did a lot of spiritual therapy also. And that actually, when I call spiritual therapy, means going for satsangs and, learning about some of our scriptures and the lessons from that. So I did a year-long course in Vedanta, which I try and continue, not so consistently, but I did it very seriously for about a year when I was going through all these ups and downs. And that really taught me a lot about relationships, attachment, detachment. And I think when you start reflecting with this kind of knowledge, it becomes very powerful, and that becomes different from overthinking. Because I think we all run that risk of going around in circles, as you said, on overthinking. It gives you direction, it gives you clarity. So that definitely helped me a lot. Does that help you?
I just want to add, because we had Ruchira here earlier, before the lunch session. And, sometimes reflecting and wanting to know yourself with the help of a coach actually is another great, thing to do.
Yeah. Thank you, Aparna. Your apology of climbing your inner Everest was excellent. And what you have not said is many gifted people have a problem with the condition that you described. Vincent van Gogh was an extreme and the best example. So what I'm trying to say, you're gifted also. My question to you is, and we all have the state of mental delirium, so it's very normal. My question is, writing this book, was it therapeutic, or it invoked painful memories, or both, or what were your emotions while writing this book?
Yeah, actually, by the time I actually got down to writing it, I was able to do it in a very disciplined way and get on with it. And so it was actually just an act of labor in terms of, writing it, sitting down and focusing on it and being disciplined, and all the good things I learned from my mother about how to write a book. And we used to often have lunch together and discuss our books. This was during the pandemic. So I was quite detached, because the main thing is to get the detachment from all the experiences, from the moods, the emotions, the thoughts, and to be able to write it, because I was thinking of the reader. I mean, if I am not detached, how can I give a good experience for the reader to actually understand and experience all of that? So I was really, really focused on creating something that would be beneficial and helpful for the reader.
I had seen one more hand. Yeah, right.
Aparna, when you try talking to yourself, usually it happens when you're going through a low. Now, when you are going through a low and you try talking to yourself, are you getting a biased, negative view of yourself?
No, it's a very good question, because whenever I'm happy, my journal is not empty. I'm just too busy being happy. These days, I have found a new app to address that problem. So now if I'm happy, I make it a point to write, I am happy. Otherwise, I go back and I look at my journal and it's just full of like, I'm depressed, I'm so unhappy, I'm really sad. So I think it's just, I think it's more that, it's important to acknowledge all the mood swings and to check in every now and then. But when you're depressed, it doesn't make me feel further, but at least makes me feel, I always have this attitude, what am I going to do about it? Okay, that has been my fundamental attitude, that I don't want to just live with this now. What is it? Whether it's the fact that I put on weight, or whether it's the fact that, I'm not progressing in my career as fast as I would like to, or whatever it is, that my attitude is, what am I going to do about it today? So that is the, I think, attitude that rescues me on many occasions.
What a lovely question. Any other questions? Okay, this is, I think, the last one. Okay. Yarata? This young lady, Ruhel, can we have the question from her?
Hi, first of all, like, you're a very strong-minded woman, and I really appreciate you coming on stage and, sharing your journey with us. I can totally relate to you. And one question is that, because, you have had such great, amazing experience in the industry, you meet so many people around you, you meet like a bunch of talented individuals, like might be better than you. So because there's some kind of thing that people who usually face mental issues or mental health issues, one thing is that they overthink a lot. I mean, hundreds and dozens of words and visions and everything that is going in and around your head, around your body. So how do you stay grounded to it? How do you actually come to the point that sometimes you might feel that you are not enough, sometimes you feel that you are in a box, but if you try to take yourself out and do something else, you might feel that the same thing, that you are in another box. So how do you not feel overwhelmed and stay grounded to it?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think that I definitely meet a lot of people who are very talented. And there was a time, really, again, as I go back to that moment when I left the family business, I used to be interviewing all these CEOs. Some of them were like 10 years younger than me, and they were billion-dollar valuation. And I'd be like, what am I doing with my life, writing an article for a newspaper that somebody may or may not read, in comparison to being a CEO. So I think there was like that big question mark, and there's a lot of us, even now you have imposter syndrome and all these kinds of things. I think for me, what I really started by looking is accepting that, first of all, that, little bit there's been a triple whammy in my life and I need to deal with it. So that acceptance is important, that, okay, that doesn't mean that you don't want to do things, but you accept where you are. I always had the resolve to want to do something more with my life. That was really important for me. I didn't want to be the mother who was in her pajamas when the kids got home from school. I just didn't want to be that mother. And the third part is this attitude of gratitude. That was like a huge thing for me. Just, always having an attitude of gratitude and saying that, be grateful for what I am, for where I am today, and being thankful. And so I just think that optimistic side for me has carried me through a lot of times when I would have been low.
Thank you so much. That is